By 1200 BC, the Ethiopians had many more partners than they'd ever had. A new kingdom, the Sabaean kingdom, formed at this time. The Egyptians, sent by Ramses III, carried down some messages and built wells along the Sudanic road all the way to Ethiopia, where we would call the land of Punt today. Now, the only problem here is that these represent the Eastern trade. There are three other trades that were happening at this time. The first coming from down south. We do not know who these people were by 1200 BC, but coming from the South African regions, we do see that there are people who emerge from there to trade with the Ethiopians. On the other side, we have the Nubian culture. The Nubian culture, or the Sudanic culture, whatever you want to call it, they trade heavily, and in fact, they've been trading for a long time. And they also represent an Eastern trade. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, which are camels. Camels represent the structure and the travel of the people living in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and also the people living in Ethiopia by this period. We know that there were a lot because bones have been found in these regions, both of them at this time, and we know that they were definitely domesticated. But the question is, how far back were they domesticated? Many bones have been found that go back to 2000 BC, but a lot of them are thought to be non domesticated in the Middle East and in Africa. Now, remember the Pangraves? Let's go back to the Pangraves before we come back and talk about 1200 BC. So, like always, I'm first going to read this and then I'm going to explain. A bone fragment, which can definitely be assigned to a dromedary, was found during the excavation of several graves belonging to the Nubian Pangrave culture, 1800 to 1600 BCE. At the Upper Nile, given the rare occurrence of camel remains in Egypt, the find of some sherds with the incised sketch of a dromedary has to be regarded as one of the most spectacular finds of the last decades. The shards from the city of Ramses belong to a dish made from local Nile clay, which is dated to the late 18th or early 19th dynasty, 14th to 13th centuries BCE. It seems that dromedaries were principally known during this period. It should be stressed that the Nile Delta is not the natural habitat of the dromedary because of its high humidity. Therefore, any artifacts depicting the camel from the city of Ramses has a strong probability to refer to domesticated animals. This evidence virtually supports a long known artifact from the tomb of the later 13th century, namely kneeling camel loaded with two jars from the early first millennium BCE. We have some camel remains which were found in Qasr Ibrahim in Egyptian Nubia. In view of this, it is all the more astonishing that the camel is never mentioned in any Egyptian text known today. There are no entries of camel in Egyptian dictionaries and no depictions of camels are known. Did the Egyptians use another word or phrase for camel, which has not yet been identified? Some suggested that the camel was ignored by the Egyptians for aesthetic reasons, but there is virtually no evidence of this. Another reason may be seen in the fact that the camel was associated with people from Western Asia who were often regarded as enemies. Nevertheless, in the later stages of the Egyptian language, a term for camel turns up as a Semitic loanword, the form of the word for camel in Demotic and Coptic, chamel, shows inner Egyptian sound changes which require its adoption before the 7th century BCE, probably at the beginning of the first millennium BCE or earlier. Curiously, the earliest known inscription reference to camels in Egypt are not from Egypt but from Mesopotamia. On the famous black obelisk of Shalmaneser III, two Bactrian camels are depicted on relief as the tribute of the land of Misri. Some 200 years later, Esarhaddon introduced camels, which he had obtained from Arabian chieftains, to carry water for the use of his army into Egypt. The evidence for the camel in Egypt has to be evaluated in the light of the natural habitat of this camel. The evidence of a desert animal should be expected to be marginal in comparison with the commonly well attested livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. While for Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Levant well defined archaeological and artistic evidence for the domesticated camel before the first millennium BC is elusive. Iran and its adjacent regions is an area which definitely yields more data. So, what were we reading? In order to answer this, we have to think about what makes sense. So, as you can see, Ethiopians have the same hairstyle as those of the ancient Nubians. But let's go back to a theory that I said before. Remember, I said the Pangrave people seem to speak a Cushitic language, and they are desert dwellers. In other words, they are Nubians who were of the desert. The Medjay, for example, are these desert dwelling police officers in the eastern side of Egypt, ancient Egypt. And these people represent that type of people, and they probably were a Cushitic speaking people. Well, the Cushitic people come from where? Usually about Ethiopia. Now, I'm not saying that they came from this place, but that they had a trade route which connected these people, and they were genetically the same as these people. These Nubians, which we can call Cushitic Nubians, but of course that's kind of confusing. The Cushitic Nubians that are of the East, represented today by obviously the Horn of Africa, but in the north, represented by a group that still rides camels today. And it was even written in Islamic texts their love for camels. The Beja. The Beja people, still to this day, represent a connection between Ethiopia and Egypt. They almost fit everything about these people: camel herding, camel riding, nomadic, traveling through from Sudan all the way to Egypt. And remember, in the time of Ibn Battuta, they were in charge of a large piece of Egypt. They've been pushed back in the modern world, but we'll get back to that. And you can see how these people would have driven the camel all the way up into Egypt in the past. These Pangraves almost leave no room for discussion that the camel was first domesticated in Africa, in Ethiopia, and then it was moved to Yemen, probably about the same time it was invented, so maybe about 2000 BC. But then it was also moved into Egypt by a Beja type people, a Cushitic people, around 2000 BC, close to when the Pangraves exist. I hope now you understand that I did not just introduce the Pangraves, the Nubian Pangraves, just for show. Now, the important part is when we're reading this, that The place where we find this camel in Egypt, and there's many reasons written in this for us to believe that it was Nubian. But let's first start with the first thing they say. So a bone fragment, which can definitely be assigned to a dromedy being a camel, was found during the excavation of several graves belonging to the Nubian Pangrave culture in 1800 to 1600 BC. So this would be pretty early. Now, we do know where camels were naturally found. They obviously, just like the horse, do not come from Egypt, but let's do the quick evolution real quick. So the horse and the camel look weird because they first evolve in the Americas and then they migrate all the way into Asia and land up in Africa. And it's interesting that it's the Nubian Pangraves, it's the Nubians that are the ones who are seen with this animal in their graves. And like they say, when we continue to read, at the Upper Nile, given the rare occurrence of camel remains in Egypt, the find of some sherds with an incised sketch of the dromedy has to be regarded as one of the most spectacular finds of the last decades. The sherd from the city of Ramses belonged to a dish made from local Nile clay, which is dated to the late 18th and 19th dynasty in the 14th to 13th centuries BCE, which is close to where Ramses takes over, both Ramses the first, second, and third. It seems that dromedaries were principally known during that period. It should be stressed that the Nile Delta is not the natural habitat of the dromedaries because of its high humidity. Therefore, any artifact depicting the camel from the city of Ramses has a strong probability to refer to domesticated animals. This means these Nubians who are carrying these animals into this region represent a pure domestication. So we have evidence of African domestication that goes around about 2000 BC. The rest of it, of course, discusses the fact that we do not see any real representation of camels in the past. And of course, this might be because it was seen belonging to the foreigners. Now, there are some suggestions, of course, that they talk about here that it maybe they saw it from Asiatics and then they assumed that it was a foreigners. But this Pangrave thing makes us know that they saw it first from the Nubians. And then, of course, we get to the other page where they talk about the fact that even the far Asiatic countries seem to have first cited camels from Egypt and then they adopted them, which means that the Nubians inspired them to use camels. But if we go back again to Ramses, what we see is the same type of writings that we've seen before. One of the most curious things that we heard said in the previous writings about the land of Punt was that they came to Egypt. There's a part in the writing, a writing from ancient Egypt, that says, I make the land of Punt come to Egypt. But let's read it. I'm paraphrasing it. As we can see here, it's the hymn to Amun, utterance of Amun, king of gods, my son of my body, my beloved Nimare, my living image, whom my limbs created, whom Mut, mistress Ashuru, Thebes bore to him, mistress of the nine bows, who brought thee up as the sole lord of thee. My heart greatly rejoices when I see the beauty. I work a wonder for thy majesty, and thou renewest youth, according as I have set thee as the sun of the two lands. When I turn my face to the south, I work a wonder for thee. I cause the chiefs of Cush, the wretched to turn to thee, bearing all the tribute upon their backs. When I turn my face to the north, I work a wonder for thee. I cause the countries of the ends of Asia to come to thee, bearing all their tribute upon their backs. They present themselves to thee with their children, in order that thou mayest give it to them the breath of life. When I turn my face to the west, I work a wonder for thee. I cause thee to seize the Tenu, so that there is no remnant of them. They are building in the fortress in the name of the majesty, surrounded with a great wall reaching to heaven, settled with the children of the chiefs of the Nubian troglodytes. And here's the important part. When I turn my face to the orient or the east, I work a wonder for thee. I cause to come to thee countries of Punt. Now I want you to think about what's just been said there. So the people of Punt, just like all the other people, are caused to come to Egypt, as it's written in the hymn to Amun. The people of Punt, as you can see, are not so distant that they will never arrive. They will arrive. And it's obvious to me, looking at the hair, looking at the camel culture, because camels were not first domesticated in Egypt, and looking at so many other details, that we are looking at a long culture, a long spanning culture of Cushite, Puntite relations that span the entire distance. It isn't a wonder to think that camels that are used by Nubians probably belong to other Africans within the African continent, especially if we consider the fact that it is said and is known that camels do not originate from Egypt. We have images from Egypt of camels, but a lot of them come from way later. They come from like the third century or the fourth century. And of course, you remember that the Romans and the Greeks, they didn't really associate camels with Egypt either, but instead with the Nubians. And since we know that the area where camels at least must have come from is Yemen or is Ethiopia or the Axumite regions, I call that the Horn of Africa. That means that we are talking about a true expansion, and the Pangraves that I was talking about must be these Cushites. There is always a conversation about ancient Egyptians and what did they know about the people living in the Nubian regions and stuff like that. But here's the final writing or the final scriptness of it. Curiously, the earliest known inscription reference to camels in Egypt are not from Egypt but Mesopotamia. On the famous black obelisk of Sahil Mansur III in the 9th century BCE, two Bactrian camels are depicted on a relief as the tribute of the land of Misri. Some 200 years later, Esarhaddon introduced camels which he had obtained from Arabian chieftains to carry water from the use of his army into Egypt. So you can see here we're talking about a later period, and we're also talking about the reference to Egypt. But what reference is this? This is a reference to the Nubian people. How do I know? Well, who else had it in all the evidence that we've gathered? Now, of course, the last part gives off the information that I said that there's a different type of camel that might have been domesticated on the other side of Asia, near Persia. While for Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Levant, well-defined archaeological and artistic evidence for the domestication of camels before the first millennium BCE is elusive, Iran and its adjacent regions is an area which definitely yields more data. So by Egypt, by India and Iran, let's wait for part two. Subscribe, uh, and do all the other stuff. Subscribe, like, share, donate if you can. These videos don't pay that much because I don't have that many views. So if you guys can be so kind, that would be much appreciated. And also, um, I'm gonna put out a video where I'm gonna take all the punt videos and put them all together to create one long video, and this will be part of them. So don't be alarmed when you see a video that is long and think I'm repeating videos or anything like that. I'm just putting it together so if you want the entire punt series, you can see the whole thing.